Thank you guys so much for joining us today on Talking Sense. I have Brian Helms from our Bryant office joining me today, and we're doing part 2 of a series here talking about divorce. So you've been through the divorce, or you're in the midst of that divorce, and for some, divorce can be a relief. For some, it's isolating and painful, but regardless of which experience you have, it does have an impact on your financial journey. So for us to ignore that topic, Brian, I feel like would not do people service.
No, it's a really traumatic time in people's lives, but there's some things that you really need to look at in regard to your finances when you do go through divorce.
And last week, we talked through specifically your bank, your credit score, and gave some tips in that area. So if you know someone going through a divorce or you're going through one, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that episode too when you finish this one today. When I went through my divorce, there were so many things that honestly, Brian, weren't even on my radar until much later, which is part of why we wanted to do this, because I think if you know what you need to focus on, it's less overwhelming.
Yes.
And so, I was just like in survival mode, I think, for a while. And you've known people going through this. So we wanted to just kind of give actionable steps that people can start with.
Sure. One of the first things that we've learned visiting with clients is it's time for a beneficiary check.
Mm-hmm.
When the dust settles and everything's kind of settled, and it's time to look at your life insurance, your investment accounts, employer plans, bank accounts, all those kind of things have beneficiaries on there. And it may be the correct person or it may not be. It may be your former spouse.
Yes. And it may, for me, trying to figure out who that next person needed to be was challenging, because I don't have a family full of financial gurus. And so it was a little bit of a challenge to say, okay, if something happened to me, who would I want this to go to? Because my kids couldn't inherit money. And a pro tip just in general, as a financial advisor, we encourage our clients to look at their beneficiaries. We do it annually.
Yes.
Because of things like, if you have a female beneficiary, it has their last name changed. Did they marry? Did they divorce? But at very minimum, we want you to look at it every 3 years. But we had a client story. I don't know if you've heard this one. We have lots of stories in the Gen Wealth lore, but this was one of those. This is the most awkward moment in a meeting room, we'll call it. So going through the beneficiaries with this client had been divorced and then remarried. Okay, so new wife, and it has been almost a decade with new wife. Like it's been a minute. Yeah. Okay, here's the thing: new wife and old wife, similar names. Not exactly the same. Middle name was different, but the first name was the same. And so we were going through the beneficiaries with this client, and new wife notices the middle initial is wrong because they had never updated it. So after 10 years of being married, they find out that they're not the beneficiary on their husband's account. So that was probably the most awkward meeting ever. So please, make sure you start with your beneficiaries. And we're going to talk about some things to do if you were in the case like I was, where your kids aren't old enough to inherit money yet. We'll talk through that in just a second, but make sure that you're checking those regularly. And especially if you've been through a divorce, make sure you've thought that through and talk to the people who you're going to name.
Don't surprise them.
Make sure they know who's got assets, where those are, who to contact. If you're working with someone like us, we are comprehensive planners. So most of our clients, their life insurance is through us. We've got a copy of their estate plan if they have one. We know where all their accounts are, but not all advisors are that way. So we call it the Honey, I Love You file.
Exactly.
And so if you've taken the time to do a beneficiary check, what should people be doing next, Brian?
You should be looking at your estate plan. And you may have been single for a number of years, but it's time to figure out, well, if you have children, they can't inherit those assets if they're under 18. So, who are you going to leave things to? Who can who's going to be their guardian if something happened to you? Who's also financially responsible to for the financial power of attorney? And something that we run into all the time is medical POA.
Yes.
Who do you trust to make those very important decisions if something happened to you and you're no longer able to make medical decisions for yourself?
Yes. I think, when you're married, your spouse is legally, most hospitals will allow them to be that. If you were unconscious, they're going to let them make decisions for you. But if you're single now, you don't have that anymore. There's not a natural person for the hospitals to go to. So you need to have that stuff prepared. In my case, when it came to beneficiaries, one thing that I didn't know before I started working here is, say I named you my beneficiary on my life insurance. Okay. Well, the minute I pass away and you accept that money, it's legally yours. Now, you may have the best intentions to take care of my children, and I do believe, Brian, that you would. Yes. You're not my beneficiary because you can't be, licensing. But yes. Even with the best intentions, if you go and you get in a car wreck and someone decides to sue you, those funds are yours. Mm-hmm. They're part of your estate, and they could be part of that claim. Exactly. So if there was a legal suit against you and you had to pay it, that's part of your assets you'd have to use. So even though you may have someone in your life that you feel like has the best intentions, if you name them as your beneficiary, instead of using an estate plan to receive those assets on behalf of your kids, they're not protected. Oh, well, let's talk about maybe you're married at the point that you inherit that. If you go through a divorce, marital assets, yes. half of it goes to the new spouse. So there's a lot of chaos that can happen if you don't have a really solid estate plan in place. In my case, what I chose to do was I named a different person as guardian than I did as financial trustee, the person who would handle the assets in the trust, because I felt like splitting those responsibilities up would kind of soften the load for whoever's got whichever one. And it creates a layer of protection for them too. There's someone else who knew what the expenses were, so that if someone ever questioned that financial person, they've got a backup. That was kind of where I went. You don't have to do that, but it is important to take some time to just think through that. And especially if your ex is not going to be a good fit. If you were in one of those situations where maybe it wasn't safe and you had to get out, well, if you don't name somebody and the court finds your ex unfit, now the court's deciding who gets your kids.
And most of the time you really don't want that. Mm-hmm. You want to make that choice.
Yes. And none of us want to think about what happens when we're no longer here. I get that that's not a fun conversation. Yeah. But our view with everything is that a plan is better than letting someone else plan it for you.
Exactly.
So if you haven't done your beneficiary check, now's the time. If you haven't sat down with an estate planning attorney, now's your time. And we've even recently, we're so passionate about estate planning that at Gen Wealth, we are partnering with a company to help us provide some resources to people so that if meeting with an attorney is not realistic for them or is overwhelming, we can help walk them through that. I'm really excited about that, especially in these situations. Definitely. So you kind of dealt with the chaos. You've dealt with the beneficiaries, which can be cumbersome. You've dealt with the estate planning. Now it's time to look at your investment strategy, look at your retirement plan, and make sure that you've kind of renewed that.
Yes. If you had a plan prior to divorce, more than likely that plan has been destroyed.
Yeah.
One way or another, it's been destroyed, mm-hmm. So the pension may have been split in half. Retirement assets may have been halved. More than likely, your savings goals are going to be different than your former spouse. Mm-hmm. So you really want to sit down with the financial advisor and develop a new plan.
Yes, there were a lot of things that I didn't realize before my divorce were really wrapped up in my husband. And mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but most of our goals were based on his timeline. Okay. Because he was in school, he was going to finish his degree, and then we were going to start chasing this other goal. Even short-term goals, a lot of them were bound by his schedule. Okay. And so I had honestly, a little bit of an identity crisis when it all kind of settled, because it was like, well, now what? What do I even want? How do I determine what goals I want to chase? Because I had been playing mom, playing wife, doing these things, and it hadn't even occurred to me that I'd be starting over at any point. But I found myself there. And, we always talk about how goals have to be unique to you. And when you're in a couple, the you is a two-person unit.
Yes.
But then you got to figure out what you want.
We hear that from our clients that, taking some time to refocus and redefine your personal financial goals is a healthy step towards healing. Mm-hmm. Figure out what you enjoy doing. Mm-hmm. It's no longer the we. It's it's the one. Is it movies, dinner? What is it that you enjoy? Going to the beach, whatever.
I'll get on that one.
There you go.
And I'm not even someone that you have to really entertain. Just let me get there.
Getting there. Okay.
But I will say, I found in my divorce, there were a lot of those simple pleasures that I enjoyed. I found hiking as a hobby. I'd never really done that much before. And I think, now let me be clear here, when it comes to discovering yourself, as people like to say, don't go crazy.
Yes.
Okay. Just like anything in your financial journey, you want to take the emotion out of it. You've got to get through the emotions. You've got to process the emotions, but you got to get the emotions out of it when you're setting goals for yourself. And I think education is way more important when you're in singlehood. And we can talk about that from your experience too, like taking the time to educate yourself about the unique challenges of meeting those goals with one income instead of two. Talk about your journey with that.
I'll probably, I've struggled, someone who's in a relationship and has a spouse, they have someone to bounce things off of. Mm-hmm. Being a single person, there's no one there,
The accountability might be lacking.
The accountability might be lacking. So you either have to be really disciplined or you have to find somebody to be that sounding board to help you make those decisions. Got
it. And what have been some of the boundaries that you've put in place for yourself that have helped you in that journey when you don't have that other person to hold you accountable?
Definitely having a budget. Starting there is
you
critical.
Used the word.
I did. Oops.
Ooh. Budget.
But it is so critical for everyone, whether you're a single person or you're in a relationship, when it comes to your finances. And, let that be your guardrails and kind of begin you on that path.
Yes. And I think there's a bit of a misnomer out there. A lot of people, I think, believe that if they don't have two people, that their ability to save, to, work towards goals is limited. But I have found that sometimes that's helpful. In that if you aren't the one that has the trouble with the spender, because, every marriage kind of has a balance. There's the spender and the saver. I found that I was a much more intentional saver when I was single than I have been since remarrying. It's been a little more challenging.
Sure.
Has that been your experience as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. For someone who comes from nothing, we didn't have any money when I was growing up. I'm definitely a saver. And I'm slowly starting to get out of that mode. I think,
you let yourself have fun at least every once in a while.
Every once in a while. But, it's like, I've always got to save, And so that's been very hard for me. I've come to realize that I'm probably too much of a saver.
Yeah.
But I'll get there one day.
Well, and I think that, though, there is a higher importance on the emergency savings when you are not in a, two-income family, for instance. I think it's important in every relationship, but especially when you're coming out of divorce and you're getting into understanding your own finances, that emergency fund is even more critical, or at least it was for me.
Sure.
Because if we had something crazy happen, I had the dryer break, right? If I had to put that on credit at that point in my life, I didn't have as much wiggle room to be able to recover quickly. And so I would maintain that emergency savings because it might take me a year to put that money back again. Yeah. And I certainly didn't want to carry debt in that situation.
Yeah, and when you have two people with earning income, it's much easier to replace that. But if you're only one person, there's not two sources flowing in, whether they're equal or one's bigger than the other. Fact is, there's only one stream coming in.
Yes, and when I was married, I could have a side hustle. Because I had built-in babysitter. I had someone we could just kind of plan around each other's schedules a little bit easier. So when I found myself single, I had to be much more intentional about taking care of myself emotionally, taking care of myself financially, because the ability to just go out and chase something was a lot more difficult. So thank you for sharing that perspective, though, because I think, when you've been through that divorce, it's often you feel like you're like not even a full for a while. You're just kind of in pieces. And so I appreciate your perspective on how to kind of win this battle as a single person. So it is time for our last 2 cents, and you can, kind of what are your final thoughts for those that might be walking this journey of divorce?
Okay. There are a lot of things in the divorce where you can feel out of control, but you can, take stock of your beneficiaries, your estate plan, investment strategy, and then begin taking some steps. You don't have to accomplish all those at one time, but begin to align them with your financial journey as you begin that next chapter in your life.
Got it. Thank you. When I was in the midst of my divorce, the wisest piece of advice I received that I still use now was focus on the next logical step. This wonderful lady in my church, Amy, came up to me one day and she goes, "Listen, I've not walked this journey, but I've walked loss. And the best advice I can give you is focus on the next logical step." Now, there were days where the next logical step was, okay, my kids need to get to school. I've got to get out of this bed. I've got to eat some breakfast so I can take care of them today. I've got to get them to school. And that was all I had in me. But then I was able to go, okay, what's the next logical step? Well, I can't just not take care of my finances. So I got to take care of that. Yes. I've got to educate myself. Wherever you need to, start there and build from it and do your best to just take the emotion out of the day-to-day grind until you can get to a better place. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today on Talking Sense. I hope you understand our mission is really just to share sound financial principles in ways that are clear and actionable. If you've benefited from this content or you know someone who's going through this journey, I encourage you to share it with them and just follow, subscribe so you can get notifications as each new episode comes out. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Talking Sense. And if you like what you hear, make sure and subscribe to the podcast to get all the newest episodes. The Gym Wealth team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or by calling our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. And while we like to have fun here, we're also financial advisors, and that means disclosures. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and Gym Wealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.